remind you that there are snacks in the back, and there will be lunch served at 12:30. We'll be moving on to the next panel. One additional point I wanted to make from the three panelists is that in the last homelessness count, it identified of the homeless people, the 2,800, 32% were Aboriginal, when Aboriginal people only make up 2% of the population. So it's disproportionately Aboriginal. And when you look at some of the human rights complaints that have been filed, including along with Pivot towards the downtown ambassadors, there's huge issues around private security in this neighborhood as well that are impacting people. And finally, I just wanted to acknowledge the great volunteer work of the youth here, without which this day couldn't have happened. So thank you very much for all of your volunteer work, and we'll move right on to the next panel.
Just a second. Who has the petition? To the front? Oh, okay, it's over there. Okay, I see it. Thanks. Just curious.
And pick up one of these leaflets from the pool table back there about Bill C-304.
It's got this graph on.
We're doing the children and families portion this morning. I'd like to thank the Elder Rose Point for doing today's opening, and the Coast Salish peoples for allowing me to live and work on their precious territory. I'm from the Tsimshian Nation, and children and families is a very important issue for our community. As a long-standing volunteer and community worker, it is an honor to have these people come and speak to us today at this wonderful event. We're going to try and keep this to the point because we're behind. But first off, we have to speak for us Dr. Penny Perry. She's been a longtime friend of the Downtown Eastside families and community workers, but most importantly, an instrumental and influential voice in child and youth care. Penny served as a former City of Vancouver child and youth advocate, and she's also an artist. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you, Grace. Okay, well, Grace knows that I have a habit of talking too much, so I'll try not to talk too much. When Grace and Sabine asked me to talk about, so what's, the importance of early childhood and early childhood programs, I thought, I'm going to look around the room and everybody's going to go, we all know they're important. Why would you ask that question? And the reason, though, it's important to know a little bit more about why they work and why we want to fight for early childhood programs is two reasons, really. Number one, we need to push politicians who are they make the decisions about where to put the money. Noel Heron this morning said, do we need a roof on the stadium or do we need money for children? And we need to be able to push those politicians and ask questions of them, and then we need to get out and vote for the people who will care about our children and care about the fact that they need support in those early years. So that's why it's important, even though we all feel it's important to know a little bit more about, does this stuff really work? Because, there are people out there who would say, oh yeah, early childhood programs are good, but kids grow up anyway. So. Well, and the truth is, yes, children get bigger, but do they get more resilient? Do they grow up to be the kind of people that we want to see in our future? We see little children and you see wonderful things in them. I was at the preschool when it opened up over on Hastings, and there was this great little group of kids, all with little mortar boards. And what we know is that a lot of kids in this community, and a lot of First Nations children especially, don't graduate from high school, don't finish elementary school. And what we know from lots of studies in other places, but what my father would have said, and Penny, your grandmother knew this, if you don't start out well, you don't finish well. So what we're talking about in early childhood is how kids start out. They start out in great families, no question, people who care and love them, but families who have lots of their own problems. And they're busy trying to find money. They're busy at 2 jobs. They're busy at many other things. So it's important that we have programs that support families and children. And we want kids to grow up not just anyway, We want them to grow up to be strong and healthy and good people. Other people would say, yeah, early childhood programs are important, but that's kind of like babysitting, isn't it? There's nothing wrong with babysitting, but no, it isn't like babysitting. The early childhood programs that are working, that really make a difference, are run by people who have training, people like Sabine and the people here who are trained and who know how to set up activities, how to deal with kids when they don't get their own way, how to spot some children who have extra difficulties. It's too late if once they get into school, people go, you know, that kid's got a problem. Well, it's much better at 2 and 3 to say, you know, that little guy, he's not speaking yet, and he should be speaking. Or that little guy can't really paint like the other little kids can. Or that little guy looks hungry. So early childhood is the time to spot some of those early problems, so that then when kids, as they grow, can get the help that they need, and so can their families. So no, it's not like babysitting. And anybody who tells you that, just say, no, you're wrong. Any politician who says, I'm all for kids, ask them more, what do you mean you're all for kids? Do you mean there should be more kids? Do you mean you like kids? Or do you know what you're talking about? Do you know what programs are worth funding? Do you know what programs are not worth funding? That's what we want to be able to ask our politicians. There are other people who would say that early childhood, yeah, that's important, but school is where you really learn. Well, school is where you learn some things, but if you don't learn early to trust people, to know people, to feel good about yourself, all those things that when kids are in preschool, they get to be learning about how other kids are. That's when you learn how to share. That's when you learn how to say, no, that's my turn now, but you're willing to give somebody else a turn. Because all that learning then is when you get older and all the people we see working in Raycam, the citizens, the people, the neighborhood people, and the staff, it's all about sharing and taking turns. It's all about what we learned very early on. And if we don't learn it very early on, it's much harder to learn it later. Okay? The other thing that we can learn, and why it's really important to have early childhood in this community, is that this community has some big issues and some big challenges about trust. Lately we've had some people who might make everybody go, you can't trust anybody. And that would be a real shame if we all stopped trusting everyone. We don't want to just blindly say, oh sure, just anybody, but we want to have our children be open enough so that they do trust other people when it's safe, and they know when it's safe, and they're able to help. Now there are other people who say, why should I pay for somebody else's kids to go to preschool? I don't even want to pay taxes for them at school. Well, I'll tell you, you pay now or you pay later, and it's much more expensive to pay once a child has not had an early start and all the things they need. They get into trouble later. We know that, and I'm not going to quote studies. Fern and others will give you more data, but it's well known that. Yeah, and I was even surprised. I of course prepared for today's yesterday on the internet. Oh my God, I've got to be smart. And so I looked up at some of the studies that have been recent, and there are people who have followed kids 40 years. A major study in the States called the Perry Preschool Study. They followed up a small number of kids, 123, but looked at kids who went to preschool and kids who didn't. And they found that people who had been in preschool tended to have better friendships, better relationships, more jobs, they were functioning better. And these were not people in really moneyed neighborhoods, they were people in regular or neighborhoods who were in fact even having trouble with the challenges. So I'm going to be said to be short, so I am going to be quite short. But what I want to say is that we know that even though in our hearts we know it's important to care about children, it's also important to be able to ask questions more than just say, I know it's good, I feel it's good. We have to know that it actually makes a difference. about whether people can grow up and be a really healthy part of the community, have a job, feel good about themselves, be what they should be as people. So not everybody has to graduate from university and graduate whatever, but everybody should be able to do exactly what they can do. And that's what early childhood is the start to making sure people are what they can be. So those elections are going to come up soon, and we should be making sure that every politician is pushed not just to say they love little children. Who's going to say, no, I hate little kids? They're not going to say that, right? But push them to say, and what do you mean? Say more about that. So you know that they're really saying, you know what? I would put our children ahead of a stadium roof. I would put our children ahead of many other things. And that's all I'm going to say for now. Yeah.
Thank you, Penny. Next up, we have Fern Jeffries, who's a longtime serving organizer of the network of East Vancouver Community Organizations, also known as NEVCO, and also has a long history of community service and government. Welcome, Fern.
Penny, I always thought they named the Perry Preschool Study after you.
I'm old enough to.
Aren't we all? An early adopter. I have the great privilege of working with a group of people here at Raychem on something we call the Inner City Response Initiative. And this is really a multifaceted initiative aimed at improving the future for children in the inner city. It's an interdisciplinary team, and it's a team that is focused on what we call a place-based strategy. So I wanted to talk a bit about what we mean by place-based strategy, because I'm hoping that this is a term everyone will be hearing a lot of in years to come. The best way in my mind of describing what this might mean is looking at the place that the Obama administration has used as its model for promoting and funding place-based approaches, and that is the Harlem Children's Zone. The Harlem Children's Zone was founded by a guy whose name prophetically is Geoffrey Canada. And he started off, I think, in the South Bronx and went through what was a typical process for a black kid growing up in the South Bronx. And after doing his usual bits in various penitentiaries and jails, stopped and said there's got to be a better way. And the whole initiative in Harlem, which is a 100-block area, is based on the principle that education is the best way to eradicate poverty. And what they have at the Harlem Children's Zone is a comprehensive program that starts with prenatal care, so that every child is brought into this world as healthy as possible in a home that is as prepared as possible to welcome and love that child. There is a full range of childcare and after-school programs, and those programs are staffed at a 1-to-4 ratio, which is what you need in the inner city when there is such stress on children and families because of the nature of the inner city. You need a much higher ratio than our government currently funds or currently requires of our institutions. The after-school programs in the Harlem Children's Zone essentially turn every public school into a community center. After school is not a time when kids roam the street and don't get their homework done or don't have a nutritious snack. After school is a time where they are supported